Across everything ornithology related, and our resident ornithologist is Neil Hermes. Good morning.
Good morning. How you going?
Oh, outstanding.
Good to talk to you. Tatiana's having a day off. You're standing in for her.
Yes. So, she's having a well-deserved day off. And look, I've been left with a lot of topics about everything that's happening, everything that's happening in ornithology, I suppose. Well, let's start with the Singapore vet team.
Sorry?
They're using chopsticks to give those injured birds the chance to fly again.
Yes, they are. It's an interesting story, and it's a wonderful thing to see that they can do that with chopsticks.
Yeah. So has there been a lot of research? Has this been a long running thing that they've been working towards, or was it just one of those aha moments and they said, chopsticks, that's what'll fix this issue?
I think it was probably just an aha moment with the chopsticks. But listen, before we go ahead, last week Tatiana and I agreed that we would do something, and some of our listeners might be expecting me to perform this week. Tatiana and I agreed that I would play a call each week.
Right.
And we'd have a little chat about a call.
Oh, please do.
I've set up a call here, and we'll be able to work through a few species, but I thought I'd play this one for the listeners first.
Go for it.
Is that coming through okay?
Yeah, it's coming. Oh, I can hear it.
So that's a pretty popular or very common call around Canberra, and it's one that people may recognise. I'm not going to say what it is just at the moment while people still have a little think about it. But of course, with bird calls, you have to be able to sort of try and learn them.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like learning a language. You have to hear them regularly. So that's a particularly a harsh sort of sound. There's a flock of birds calling there. And that was a group of gang cockatoos calling.
Right.
So that can be our first bird of the week call, if you like.
I was going to say, I thought we'd have people bring in and guess what it was. I mean, we can't give them you get bragging rights across Canberra, but that's about it.
Well, we can do that another day. But I thought we'd start with the gang.
Good.
And if people have heard that call around, I get them around my yard here in Ryden all the time.
Yep.
So the gang cockatoo is a particularly regular bird in gardens, and it's a call that's relatively easy to remember. It's fairly harsh. Some people talk about a sort of creaky gait or something like that. But that's the first of my gang cockatoo calls that we'll play each week.
We can expect a whole series on this, so that's going to be a lot of good fun. And we can also identify that sound in the garden, because I think I've heard that hanging around my place as well. Now, just what have we got here? A new theory explaining the mystery of bird migration.
Yes, so bird migration has been one of these great mysteries for a long time in terms of how birds can actually know. Last week we were talking about coals, the cuckoos, and of course they're leaving in the next a few weeks off to North Queensland. How does a bird that's been born in Canberra know how to find its regular haunts the haunts of its parents use in Cape York? And the relatively easy answer to that is, of course, the young birds can just follow mum and dad.
Yep.
And in fact, that's what they'll probably do this season. But how do they know how do mum and dad know how to get there, and how do they know their way back? And there's a lot of research being done now on magnetic orientation and the combination of the magnetic fields, as well as stars, as well as climate effects. So it's a whole combination of effects, which mean that birds are now we're understanding better now how bird migration works.
Right. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I would just assume they had followed their parents to these places and assume they had a good memory, but obviously there's a bit more involved than that. Now, Riverina rice farmers, they're offering areas of crop to protect Australasian bitterns.
Look, this is a particularly great story, Josh. I think it's now a lot of the stories about birds in Australia at the moment are about water, because of course we've had so much water in the last and rain in the last year or so, and we have this La Nina rain effect that's meaning that we've got a lot of water around. I mean, we all know Canberra's been very wet this summer, but all through the inland it's wet as well. And the big rice growing areas in places like Griffith,
yep.
The rice farmers have a lot of water. And in particularly this season, there's 2,000 hectares of rice crop is now signed up to be grown under conditions that are suitable for the bittern. Now, the bittern is a very rare swamp bird. It's sometimes referred to as the bunyip bird because, of course, that's how we get the story about the bunyips living out in the bush at night. They have this weird booming call, and they're down to a few thousand birds. But the rice farmers now are able, by managing the way they grow their rice, including flooding their paddocks early, including cat and fox predation control, and a range of other things, they can help the nesting birds in the rice fields. And there's 2,000 hectares now has been signed up by commercial rice farmers to help the bittern. And I mean, it's partly because they've got plenty of water this year and they can afford to do this. But it is double the area of rice properties since a couple of years ago that are now part of this program to try and increase the number of Australasian bitterns. And the really good part of this story is, of course, it's commercial operators working with conservation to save what is a very rare bird. And it's a win-win-win all round.
Now, are bitterns attracted to, are they only attracted to the swampy conditions around there in light of all the rain we were discussing earlier, or is there some sort of affinity they have to rice crops? Does that not matter, or what's the situation there?
They're a strange-looking bird. I mean, when they land in a swamp, they have a long pointy bill and long marks on their feathers. And when they put their bill in the air, you almost can't pick them from a reed bed. I mean, they are specifically designed and live in dense reed beds. That's what they do, and they are highly camouflaged birds. They will occur here in Canberra around the Jerrabomba wetlands in our reed beds at the end of the lake. But clearly, rice paddocks are fabulous places for them. So where we put in rice paddocks, the bitterns love it. But the rice has to be managed in a way that doesn't, the birds don't lose their nest at a critical time because of harvesting or whatever. So the rice crops have got to be grown a certain way to protect the birds. So the birds love swamps, they love rice paddocks, and rice farmers, if they manage the properties well, can actually have bitterns as well as rice, which is fantastic. Right.
Now, Carnaby's black cockatoo, accolades are in order because it set a long-distance flight record.
Yeah, so the Carnaby is a rare Western Australian cockatoo. It's a bit like our big yellow-tailed black cockies that we get round. I saw a pair this morning, actually, here in Canberra, the yellow-tailed blacks. This is a similar species that occurs in WA, very rare, quite an endangered bird. But there's been a lot of banding done, and what they do is they put the band on the leg of the bird, and on the band it'll have a number. Now, if you recapture the bird, you can tell, that it's the same bird. And you can tell where it is and how long it was since you last handled it. But a big bird like a cockatoo is not easy to catch often. So what they do is they actually put colour bands on the other leg. Oh. So from a distance, you can actually see that bird's got a yellow and a blue band on it or whatever.
Right. And then you save yourself the trouble of trying to catch it.
Well, it saves the bird the trouble of being caught, it saves you the trouble of catching it, and it saves you the trouble of getting your fingers snapped off.
I can imagine that would, yeah.
So what it means is, of course, someone who's a good photographer can take a picture of the bird as it's flying along or in a tree somewhere, and with careful examination of the photograph, you can see, look, it's got a yellow and a blue band on its left leg, therefore it's X bird, and we know such and such. And this is exactly what happened in Perth just recently. They've been wondering where the birds that have been breeding around Perth have been going, and they've now photographed a bird 200 kilometres away after the breeding season. And so we're learning where these birds travel to, specifically an individual bird is travelling to, by being able to observe the bands that have been put on them when they were a chick in the nest without having to recapture the bird. A great story and a great observation by the photographers who did that work.
Outstanding. Now, we were talking earlier about the rainfall and how it's obviously encouraged the rice crops to protect the Australian bitterns, but rainfall has also brought a return of endangered wetland birds in the Central West, hasn't it?
It's fabulous. I mean, it's a bit of a downer for us here in Canberra because, of course, we don't have all the birds on Lake Burley Griffin and Jerrabomba wetlands. No. Because guess what? Conditions are fabulous out west.
Oh, so they've all flown west for the summer.
They've all flown west. Yeah, they have. Go west, young man, and they have. and they're in places like Lake Cowell, which hasn't seen water for decades. places like the Macquarie Marshes up in the central west of New South Wales. And these huge wetland systems are now absolutely chock-a with water. And what we've got is birds like the blue-billed duck, which is a small diving duck, a particularly rare and somewhat endangered duck, breeding in large numbers as a consequence of the rainfalls that we've had out there. And bird watchers around town, around Canberra, are going to be keen to see, as the waters dry up out west, we'll probably get movements of these birds coming back to our more permanent wetlands around Canberra, and we'll be the beneficiaries of being able to see these birds when they come back. But it's great to see birds like magpie geese, blue-billed ducks, etc., all building up in numbers right through from Griffith up to Dubbo and north along those various river courses and swamplands in places like Barrenbox, etc. Fabulous time out there.
Good-o. And we'll finish on some exciting news. The missing macaws, they're no longer missing.
No, they're not missing. No. This is a nice story. I mean, macaws, the blue and gold macaws are a large South American bird, huge long tail, big bill. People will recognise them. They're often seen in zoos and things. They're a particularly common bird in South America, but they're very common in aviaries. They're a very popular aviary bird. And there's a botanic gardens that has this display up in Queensland, I think, and they had a couple of these macaws on display, which is fabulous, and they were providing a lot of enjoyment for people. But somehow or other, these two macaws escaped, and they've been on the loose for many weeks, and they're very distinctive. These birds,
very
meter long, and of course, once they're out in the wild in Australia and they're on their own, they're vulnerable to eagles and all sorts of things. So that they were vulnerable. But the happy news is that both the birds were able to be coaxed back with some food and are now safely back on display in their aviaries, where they'll be safe and not endangered of or in risk of being killed in the wild from some unfortunate event. So that was a great story. Beautiful birds. They talk, of course. Some zoos, they have these macaws. They fly around the zoos like homing pigeons. They're an amazing bird.
Yeah. That's terrific. So, excellent, Neil. Well, always very exciting to find out what's going on in the field of ornithology, and we thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much, and all the best for the bird watching for all your this morning. Ciao.
I'm sure there's a few out there. Thanks, Marty. Neil joining us there, who is our resident ornithologist, and he'll be back at the same time next week.